Alright, so it's a balmy 42 degrees outside today, so I thought I'd do my valve lash. And basically what you have to do to start is obviously get your valve cover off. That's going to entail taking off all your vacuum hoses. I have a few less than normal because I've deleted some of them. And then you undo your little nuts there. Pretty self-explanatory. Just take off everything that's in the way to start so that you can get your cover off. And also you might want to order a gasket kit with the little half moons, because those tend to leak, and if your gasket is no good you won't be able to reuse it, but you won't know that until you take it off. So I say just have everything on hand before you do it. Okay, the instructions for this is on page EM33. It says cold clearance, but when you do the warm, that's literally the exact same numbers, and I am doing it warm. So first thing it wants you to do is set your number 1 cylinder to top dead center compression. So it says check and make sure the rocker arms on cylinder number 1 are loose and tight on 4. So these are not loose. What it means by loose, and I don't know if you can see this, you get like a tiny little bit. They don't mean loose flapping around. So I'm tight on number 1 and loose on 4. So I have to turn my crank. And to top dead center, let me show you, see if we can get that. Those timing marks there, my 2 yellow dots have to line up. So we have to turn our crank manually. It's easier if you have 2 people. I don't have 2 people, so I'm just going to go a little bit and recheck, a little bit and recheck. When I get it to top dead center, I'll come back. Okay, so to get our crank lined up to top dead center, we're just going to put a 19mm nut on our crank bolt, and you want the crank to turn clockwise. And I only have to go a little bit, so I'm just going to do a little bit of an adjustment. And if you want to take your spark plugs out, it'll make it easier because you're not trying to pull against compression. I left mine in because it's just more time consuming than I want to put into this. So once you get your crank set to top dead center with number 1 cylinder rocker arms loose and 4 tight. Now if you get to top dead center and you're like, what the heck, my rocker arms are still tight, just remember there's 2 top dead centers. 1 is compression and 1 is exhaust. So you might be in the exhaust stroke. If that's the case, you just have to turn it around again, and then you should be on compression. So once you're there, it wants you to check your thickness on both of your number 1 valves, on intake number 2 and exhaust number 3. And for your intake, your clearance is 0.20, exhaust is 0.30. So you just pick your appropriate feeler gauge. Oops. I'll do my intakes first, so that's going to be 0.2. If for whatever reason this one's broken, it's lost, you can add, as long as you put 2 together that add up to 0.20, it's fine. You can do a 0.15 and a 0.05. Okay, so it wanted us to check our clearance on intake 1 and intake 2. And if you're looking at your engine, the passenger side is your intake valves, and then your driver's side is your exhaust valves. It's probably obvious, but maybe not to everybody. So you have your rocker arm, and the top of your valve stem is down in there. Come on, focus. And you want your feeler gauge to go in between those 2 contact points. So see how that is not getting in there all the way? That means this one is too tight, and we will have to loosen that up. And then we check our number 2 intake while we're over here, and we have our 0.2 feeler gauge ready. And go through again. Yep, and that one went through. And it's okay to be tight and have a little bit of drag, but as long as you're getting your feeler gauge all the way through there, then your clearance is good. So the book is telling us to test our number 1 exhaust and our number 3, and it's the same thing. You just find your little space in between your rocker arm and your valve stem, and you put your 0.3 feeler gauge in, and if it goes through all the way, even if it's tight, no problem, you're good. And then we want to check number 3, same operation. Kind of stick it in from the side and work it through, and that feels good. And then the next step is we're going to turn our crank 1 revolution to set our other cylinders where they need to be so we can check those valves. Okay, so once we've rotated our crank 1 revolution, we're going to check clearance on intake 3 and 4 and exhaust 2 and 4, and it's the same procedure. You just stick your feeler gauges in. So when you're adjusting whichever rocker arms that you're going to adjust, whether you tighten or loosen, you have to make sure that your crankshaft is back in the position it was when you first measured them. So like phase 1, I measured my number 1 intake and that was too tight, so we're going to loosen it. But I had turned my crank and I was in phase 2 doing my other one. So now I have to turn my crank a whole revolution again to get me back in the position that I need to be. And once you get there, you loosen your nut and you loosen your screw so that you can get your 0.20 feeler gauge in there with room to spare. And then once you've got it in there, you're going to go ahead and just immobilize your nut and tighten your screw down until you meet like the slightest little bit of resistance. And then you check your feeler gauge and make sure you've got some drag. Got it tightened down to where you want it so that your feeler gauge fits fully in there and has some drag as you pull it out. You're going to now hold your screw tight with your screwdriver and use your wrench to tighten up your nut so that nothing is going to move anymore, and now you have it how you want it. And then just go ahead and give it another check. Leave your feeler gauge in there while you're doing it so that when you're done tightening, you can still check it and make sure that nothing got loosened or too tight as you were tightening everything down. So I bought this new gasket set. It comes with metal half moons instead of the rubber ones. 2 of those, 4 nuts, and 4 of these little hard rubbery grommets, and the gasket obviously. Put a link in the description. So I'm going to go out and scrape all my old half moons off, which when you put them in, you use RTV, which somebody used plenty of, so they're going to be hard to get off. So I have this little plastic razor blade. I'm going to go scrape all that off. So these are in there pretty good. The way I'm doing is I'm just taking some needle nose pliers and kind of rocking it back and forth to loosen it up. And I'll just tear it away. I put a plastic bag I kind of tucked in there tight to catch any debris I don't want going into my nice clean new oil. So that's got a lot of black stuff in there that we have to get out before we can put the new ones on. So I'm gonna just try to go to town with my little plastic razor blade and hope for the best. Alright, so I've got my little half moon areas cleaned out to the best of my ability, and it says to apply seal packing to the cylinder head installation surface of the plug, which is the curved part. So we'll do that, and then install them, and then you put a little dab on the top of each one after you already get it in there. So that's what we'll do. And that's how I applied it. I just made sure it was filling in the whole area. Then squeeze it down in there. There we go. So once you are done making all your adjustments and you've put your new half moons in, I let it sit for about an hour just to tack up, and then you load your new gasket into your valve cover, and then you just put it back on. Now, just to be clear, you don't have to get new. Like, these were probably okay, but I knew my half moons were leaking, and this new kit came with the new half moons and the grommets, so I'm just going to use all my new stuff, but I'll save my old stuff because it's probably still okay, except for the half moons. Those were trash, so I'm just throwing those away. And this is what I used to seal my half moons. You don't put sealer on any of this. And then just use a cloth with some brake cleaner on it and come and wipe down your mating surfaces as good as you can too, just to get the oil off. And then you're all done. Once you get it tightened down, it does not give torque specs in the manual. It just says tighten your nuts on your valve cover, and then start it up and just listen. You don't want to hear any more clicking or clacking than you had previously. If that's the case, your valves might be too loose, even if they're to spec. Sometimes you gotta, you know, you have a little wiggle room there. You might have to tighten them down, or you might have tightened your valve cover down too far and now they're hitting, the rocker arms are hitting the top of it. So that's the gist of it.